This is the southern necropolis in the Gorbals area of Glasgow, where in September 1954, hordes of schoolchildren swarmed over the 7-foot-high walls, hunting a vampire with iron teeth. Although authority figures at the time thought this had something to do with horror movies or American comics, actually, it has its root in much, much older folklore of southern Scotland and northern England. The southern necropolis is on the south side of Glasgow, near to the River Clyde, and was historically a fairly industrial area of the city, with an ironworks called Dixon's Blazes, or more formally Govan Ironworks, operating behind the cemetery until 1958. On 23rd of September 1954, a reporter called Malcolm Nicholson was calling around local police stations looking for an interesting story to write up for a local paper. When he rang the police station at Lawmore Street in Glasgow, he heard people laughing in the background and a voice saying, "Tell him about the vampire." The night before, the police had been called in to deal with crowds of children who had swarmed the graveyard looking for a vampire. Nicholson published the story in a Glasgow morning paper called The Bulletin, and it got picked up by the national press. For about 3 days, kids continued to come looking for this vampire in the graveyard. It was reported in the Scottish Daily Express, the Daily Record, the Daily Mirror, which is UK-wide, the Sunday Post, the Sunday Mail. According to the Bulletin, householders in Caledonia Road had called the police because hundreds of children were swarming through the streets into the southern necropolis, looking for a monster or vampire with iron teeth, which had killed and eaten 2 wee boys. The wee boys supposedly killed and eaten, never identified. The shouts and screams of the children had become so loud that normal conversation was impossible. A policeman was reported as saying that the adults had approached him asking, "Is there anything in this vampire story?" But as darkness fell and it started to rain, the hunt tapered off. The following night, similar scenes occurred. The cemetery guard had to be reinforced, but scores of children scaled the walls looking for the vampire. On Saturday, the 25th of September 1954, the Daily Mirror reported amazing scene as hundreds of children rush cemetery. However, by Sunday, the Sunday Mail was saying vampire with iron teeth is dead. The whole thing had blown over. The children had stopped hunting the vampire. And that was the end of that. But the story is really interesting, partly for why this happened and for the folkloric roots of this vampire hunt. All sorts of ideas seem to have come together in the children's minds to prompt their hunt, some of them more contemporary to the 1950s than others. Interestingly, the vampire hunt in 1954 was also connected to ideas about aliens and UFOs. On the 23rd of September, the Daily Record received many calls about a mysterious thing or flying saucer over Glasgow, which turned out to be a light aircraft on an advertising stunt. On the 25th of September, the Scottish Daily Express reported that some of the children were saying a man with a green mask had landed from Mars and a spaceship crashed into the cemetery and caught fire. There was a science fiction film called Devil Girl from Mars with a Martian woman and her giant robot landing in their flying saucer on the Scottish moors that had been shown earlier in the month. So it may have been something to do with that. At the time of this incident with the Gorbals vampire, there was a bit of a campaign against American comic books and American horror movies. So American comic books and horror movies ended up getting the blame for the kids going crazy looking for this vampire. Dark Mysteries number 15, called The Vampire with Iron Teeth, had been published in America in December 1953, and there had been B-movies showing at local cinemas, including Them, which is the giant ants movie, and a comedy called The Bowery Boys Meet the Monsters. But when interviewed as adults, some of the children involved weren't familiar with any of them. Ronnie Sanderson, for example, who was 8 years old at the time and took part in the hunt, did not have a television at home at the time it happened and had never seen a scary movie or read a horror comic. American comics were few and far between in the south side of Glasgow. Actually, not only might they not even have read those comic books or seen those films, but this kind of hunt had a long history. It wasn't the first time it had happened. Geoff Holder, in his book Paranormal Glasgow, has provided a summary of other hunts that are not remembered nearly as well as the hunt for the Gorbals vampire because they didn't get the same attention in national news. He says in the early 1930s in Govan, a large number of children were hunting a banshee, I am going to do a video on the Banshee as soon as I get a chance, which is a whole other fascinating area of Irish Scots legend and folklore and mythology. Around 1934 or 36 in Lint House, 100 to 150 children over 2 or 3 nights went hunting a white lady. 1935 or 6 and 1938 in Gorbals, hundreds of children over several nights were out hunting spring-heeled jack. Now, spring-heeled jack had been a phenomenon apparently spotted in many areas around the UK from the mid-19th century. London in 1837 was his first appearance, and he had a long history throughout the 19th century of being spotted, particularly in London and in Birmingham and the Black Country, and this is another figure I will almost certainly do a video about at some point in the future. Spring-heeled Jack was named for the spring shoes or spring boots he supposedly wore, which allowed him to leap high into the air and clear a stile in a single bound. The legend recurred throughout the 19th century across the UK and into the 20th century, with sightings as late as 1904 in Liverpool. He had apparently made it all the way to Glasgow as well. Holder notes, one correspondent recalled standing with other children in Errol Street, looking up at an open window, waiting for spring-heeled Jack to appear. Another remembered waiting in a similar sense of anticipation near Dixon's Blazes. One correspondent said he used to scare his friends by saying, "Here comes spring-heeled Jack." And there were more. There was another hunt in the 1950s at St. Francis School in Gorbals. Children would gather outside the school hoping to get a glimpse of a disembodied hand that haunted the building, where it wrote on blackboards and moved statues. Around 1960 in Paisley or Foxbar, around 100 children on successive nights were hunting a maniac. No further details. Around 1969 or 70 in Paisley Glenburn, around 10 children spent an afternoon hunting a mini-man. Around 1985, we're into my lifetime now, around Kilmarnock Dean Castle, more than 100 children over several nights were hunting a ghost called the Grey Lady. And Holder adds one with no date. An uncanny man nicknamed Staring Eyes wandered round Dalmarnock. He could be made out in the darkness of unlit closes because his staring eyes shone brightly. Holder then mentions a report from all the way back in 1878 on the hobgoblins of Cowcaddens. This is from a Victorian supernatural compendium called The Mysteries of All Nations. One night it was whispered that the school at the corner of Stirling Street and Milton Street had become the abode of a horde of warlocks. Dozens of persons said they had witnessed the hobgoblins in the enjoyment of their fiendish fun. In a brief space of time, the whole neighbourhood turned out to see the terrible visitants that had come among them. As many as from 4,000 to 6,000 people, the large majority children in groups of 3s and 4s, clinging to each other's hands, and in mortal terror of being suddenly spirited away no one knew where, assembled to catch a glimpse of the mysterious cause of the commotion. And the excitement grew to such a height that one night the authorities stationed 9 policemen round the school to restore order. Eventually, the police sent 2 detectives into the attics of the building to try and arrest the ghost if it came in their direction. After waiting several hours, they just left the school to its ghostly occupant. And it turned out that it was the reflection from a set of mirrors in the house opposite, falling upon a series of thickly glazed maps hanging on the school wall, which appeared to have produced these appearances. The roots of the vampire hunt and the search for a vampire with iron teeth go back much further than contemporary American comic books, which probably took the idea from pre-existing folklore themselves. In southern Scotland, these stories may be connected to the mysterious figure of Jenny with the iron teeth. Hugh Mackintosh, writing The Origin and History of Glasgow Streets in 1902, described frequent raids made by children from the east end of Glasgow near to the southern Necropolis that had taken place about 100 years earlier, that is, in the early 19th century. According to Mackintosh, the children believed an ogre was living in the garden of a house near Glasgow Green, not far from the River Clyde. 2 spinster ladies named Allen lived in the house, one of whom had rather prominent teeth, which had been operated on by a clumsy dentist who had left the metallic fixings quite too apparent, gaining her the nickname Jenny with the iron teeth. This would be rather early for iron fillings, but it does give the story a root at least as far back as 1902, when Mackintosh was writing. There is a poem in the Scots language from 1897 called Jenny with the Iron Teeth. This is written by Alexander Anderson. The Scots language is a Germanic language closely related to English, but it also borrows words from Scots Gaelic. There's some connections with Ireland and Ulster Scots, which is my family background. Anyway, this poem, Jenny with the Iron Teeth, may have a connection with this idea of iron teeth. Now, I am going to try to read this in Scots, please forgive my pronunciation. The poem is about a mother who is driven to her wit's end by a fractious child and invites Jenny with the iron teeth to come and take the baby or toddler. It goes, "What a plague is this o' mine, winna steak is he, though I happy more the head as cosy as can be. Sleep, and let me to my work, and the clays to ain. Jenny with the iron teeth, come and take the bairn." It's not a very nice poem, really, but it's very interesting, and it does refer to Jenny with the iron teeth. Jenny with the iron teeth may be connected to Jenny Greenteeth, a frightening figure from Liverpool and the north of England who was said to lurk in ponds and stagnant pools, waiting to drag careless children to their deaths, similar to the Norse Nirk and to some White Lady stories. Although the adults around them panicked, it seems most likely that the children weren't really taking their vampire hunt all that seriously at all. It's true that they had to scale the 7-foot-high walls in order to get into the cemetery, but for determined 8 to 10-year-olds, that was probably part of the attraction. The Gorbals was not a particularly nice area of Glasgow back in the 1950s. It was pretty rough, and it was also lacking playgrounds and areas for children to play. So people who grew up here in the 1950s have said that basically the graveyard, the southern necropolis, was like the kids' playground. It's where they would come to kind of play and run around in the open air a little bit. So it's perhaps not surprising that the children had this kind of game going on in the graveyard. Considering that the graveyard was kind of being used as the children's play area, it strikes me that a lot of this is really like kids just playing a game, using old nursery rhymes and old folk tales that they'd heard, bits and pieces of folklore, and putting it together and deciding to go on a vampire hunt. I mean, the press at the time was characterising it as a kind of mass hysteria, but that's attributing adult motivations to children. Children don't need that much of a motivation to scale the walls of a cemetery and go running around looking for a vampire. Like, to an adult, that's something that comes across as strange and crazy and, oh my God, what are they doing? But to a child, it's just a game. I think it's just a game, but the fact it's a game with its roots in the folklore of southern Scotland and northern England and Jenny with the iron teeth and all this stuff is something I find really interesting. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to support the channel, do consider buying one of my books, Creepy Classics, Ghost Stories from Ancient Rome, from Ancient Greece, and Haunting Tales for Winter, and subscribe to my channel for more spooky stuff, ghost stories, and myth, legend, and folklore in general. Until next time, bye! Loki couldn't come on this trip, but he is very happy to see me home again. There's a good boy. There's a good boy. Shall I go downstairs, get you a treat? Yeah?